I'm Susan Page, Washington Bureau Chief of USA Today, and this is Capitol Download. We're at the White House complex with Ambassador Susan Rice, President Obama's National Security Advisor. Thanks so much for joining us.
It's great to be with you.
In the last few days, we've seen an ISIS leader killed by U.S. Special Forces in Syria, but ISIS also has taken control of a key city in Iraq, Ramadi. What does this combination of events tell us about the battle against ISIS and how it's going?
Well, Susan, I think the first thing to remember is that we have known from the outset that this would not be a short engagement on the part of the United States. This is going to be a longer battle, but this is going to be a difficult and extended operation. And the Iraqi security forces face their own internal challenges in terms of leadership, in terms of their capacity to deal with ISIL, particularly in the Sunni-controlled areas of Anbar province, which is where Ramadi is and where this setback occurred. Ramadi has been contested now for about 18 months, and that's clearly a setback. The Iraqi security forces are now trying to regroup. The Prime Minister has asked for the support of what they call the popular militia forces, military forces, and indeed the leadership of Anbar province, the Sunni leadership, has invited these Shia forces to join in the battle. So they will engage. We will continue to provide support. They're going to be back and forth on the battlefield here. And while they've lost territory net in both Iraq and Syria over the last many months, it's not going to be a linear progression.
And is the United States comfortable with the increased use of these Shia militias in this largely Sunni province?
From the U.S. point of view, we're prepared to support whether they're Sunni tribesmen, Iraqi security forces, Shia forces, Kurdish forces, provided that they are all operating under the command and control of the Iraqi government in Baghdad. Regardless of who among the Iraqi forces are part of that, then we're prepared to be supportive.
Were you disappointed in the lack of effectiveness by the Iraq security forces?
Well, they've had some setbacks, and Ramadi is one. They've also had successes, and we've seen that in various places as well. It's an uneven force, quite frankly, both in terms of the will of the forces, their equipment, their leadership, and that's part of the challenge that we have in trying to build it back. We're also trying to ensure that it is not a sectarian dominated force, that it represents all of the Iraqi people. There are weaknesses that we're working with them to try to address, but this is going to be a long slog.
Is there anything that's happened that would cause the United States to change what role we take or what strategy we follow?
We are not going to own this battle as Americans and put combat forces back on the ground again. That is not what this is about. It's not what we think is necessary, nor do we think over the long term it would be successful.
Should Americans be concerned about a threat from ISIS in terms of attacks on U.S. soil? We saw the attack in Dallas a week or so ago, inspired by ISIS. Should Americans be worried about that?
I think Americans need to understand that we live in a world where the terrorist threat remains real, and we've been living in that context for many years now. I don't think any of us can discount the possibility that ISIL or Al-Qaeda or one of their affiliates could be directly responsible for or be the inspiration behind attacks either in the homeland or overseas. This is something we're very vigilant about. We're doing all we can to disrupt and degrade their capacity to do that, but I think we need to be realistic and recognize that that remains a risk.
You've been working hard to build support for a prospective nuclear deal with Iran. 6 weeks until the June 30 deadline to complete the negotiations. Are you confident that there's going to be a final deal?
I wouldn't say confident, hopeful. The jury's out. We're working very hard on this. Our negotiators are, but it has to be a deal that meets our fundamental bottom lines.
Better than 50-50, though, you would say, now that we're...
Slightly better than 50-50.
You had some skepticism among Arab Gulf leaders. You had them to a Camp David summit last week. It sounded like you were pretty successful in persuading them. How would you judge their attitude when they left the summit compared to when they arrived?
I think they felt very good about it when they left. In fact, they've been very forthright in sharing that feedback with us directly. But we continue to be clear that the United States is not going to accept a deal that we think is contrary to our interests or to Israel's, or for that matter to our other partners in the region. A good deal needs to cut off all of Iran's pathways to a nuclear weapon, including any covert ones, and extend the breakout timeline for Iran's ability to obtain the material for a nuclear weapon to a year or more.
Is the president reaching out himself to Prime Minister Netanyahu to talk about the nuclear deal?
I don't think the issue is necessarily that they aren't talking enough. I think the issue is that there's a fundamental disagreement about the merits of there being any negotiated nuclear deal with Iran that leads to the outcome that I described.
And even if we can't persuade, if we, the United States, can't persuade the Prime Minister that the United States is right on that, similarly, we're prepared to continue to believe in the deal that you've outlined, regardless of his objections, right? There's just a difference.
Susan, yes, there's a difference of view. It won't be whether the United States differs with Israel. It'll be a question of whether the outcome of the negotiation satisfies the international community and of course, primarily the United States as to whether or not we go ahead with this deal.
One last question. We interviewed on Capitol Download Congressman Trey Gowdy a few weeks ago, who heads that Benghazi Select Committee in the House. He said he was going to call you to testify on Benghazi. Will you testify before that committee?
Susan, I haven't received a request, and so I'll cross that bridge if and when that request comes.
All right. Ambassador Susan Rice, thanks so much for joining us on Capitol Download.
Great to be with you. Thanks for having me.